The discord and division in our society must be healed. We must heal it quickly. As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America.
That was former President Donald Trump addressing the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last night, formally accepting his party's 2024 nomination. Trump called for unity, but he also hit some of the divisive themes that he returns to regularly. Joining us right now to talk about it is Arthur Brooks. He is American Enterprise Institute's president emeritus, also a Harvard professor. And what do you think about what you saw last night, Arthur? We've been talking for some time about how both parties have some issues in terms of trying to make people feel good about things. President Trump was pretty clear, former President Trump, that he was going to be shifting towards a more unified messaging after last weekend's events. What did you think of what you saw?
Hi, Becky. It's great to see you. The first 10 minutes of the speech were pretty unifying and very encouraging, and then it kind of went back to ordinary form. And the ordinary form, by the way, was not Trump form. It's normal American politics form, which is not about governing. It's about winning. The biggest problem that we have in these elections is that one side wins 51% approximately of the vote and does what they want, and the other side wins and nullifies what the other side does. What we're going back and forth in this kind of political ping pong match, that's really bad for the country. The result of that is that we need people who are focusing on not just winning, but also governing, and that's about persuading. So more of the first 10 minutes. That's what we need. And if President Trump can change his tone for the rest of the campaign and do more of that first 10 minutes, it'll be a lot better. And by the way, it'll be a much easier election, I think, for the Republicans.
Arthur, I think you're probably right just in overall terms, but this may not be a 51% win. At least that's not what the polls suggest in some situations. It's certainly not what Democratic donors think, which is why they've been fleeing and not donating. We had a report just a little bit ago that the big donor for the Democrats, the big donor dollars probably only came in at about 25% of what had been expected for the month. That tells you a lot about where they think things stand.
Yeah, that's right. But even if it were a complete landslide in a popular vote, President Trump would win 57%. And you know, that's not the way to unify a country. The truth of the matter is we're highly polarized. We're in tremendous disagreement, in no small part because the way that the political structure and the media has pulled us apart, profiting from that discord that we have in the country. And it's time now for responsible people in both politics and media and on social media and in business to start saying that we are fundamentally a 90% country on the things that really matter. Look, 93% of Americans literally say they hate how divided we become as a country. That's a big market opportunity. If Elon Musk saw a market for 93% that was unserved, that would be something he'd be jumping into right now. And that's what I think former President Trump has an opportunity to start doing.
When is the last time you can think of an example where there was a more unifying message in the United States? I mean, I go back to post 9/11, but maybe you can think of some other situations.
Yeah, I can think of the time coming out of 9/11, for example, where President Bush was trying to be as unifying as possible, and it was extremely successful, at least temporarily. And again, nothing is permanent in politics. Nothing works for every single person in the country. But you really can get large majorities of Americans behind you, not by watering down your policy positions. No one would ask the Republicans and the Democrats to be more conservative or liberal or somewhere in the middle, but rather to say, look, I know you're going to hear what I have to say, and you're not going to agree with everything I have to say, but you're not going to get to the end of my speech and think I don't love you and your family. That's the kind of rhetoric that can actually win, because that's what we actually need. Look, I think all of us would vote for anybody in either party that truly wanted to unite the country, because the strength of our country is in our unity, and we're going to get weaker and weaker and weaker election after election if we keep going the way that we are.
In terms of what it might look like if you have, let's say, a red wave that takes over not just the White House, but the House, maintains the House and potentially takes over the Senate. What do you look at state houses? Is that something that builds more unity or not? Or does it entirely depend on what the leader ends up saying?
No, what that is would be a temporary wave, and again, I'm personally more on the conservative side, and so I welcome more conservative policies. But what I want more than the policies that I favor is a longer term sense of a trajectory of policy that can last in this country, so we can make progress on big issues that are facing the country. And that means me not getting everything that I want. Look, if there's a big red wave because of political circumstances right now, and it's both houses and the White House, okay, 2 years. How much are you going to be able to do in 2 years that can't be nullified 2 years later when there's when we snap back, because it's not a big red wave anymore. And that's what's going to happen if we continue to polarize and use this polarizing rhetoric. It's kind of like these companies that go quarter to quarter to quarter, and they have suboptimal performance over a 10-year period. That's American politics. It's going 2-year cycles to 2-year cycles. And we're simply not addressing the things that this country needs to address.
Arthur, your message appeals to somebody like me, where I would love to see a more civil discourse take place. I'm sure that's the case with a lot of Americans. I know it's the case with a lot of business leaders. Does it appeal to politicians, and what have you heard back from them when they hear your message?
Yeah, a lot of politicians. Well, and the interesting thing about it is when I first moved to Washington, when I was the president of AEI, when I first got there, I thought, they're different than we are. They're not like us. No, most politicians, most members of Congress, for example, they're just like us. And they'll tell you privately, that's what I want. That's what I want for my community. I want more unity for my family, for the future of the country. But they get into this kind of suboptimal political equilibrium where they feel like they can't get any support from their party unless they're being as extreme as possible. And that's what we need to actually start breaking out of. Now, the good news is I see all sorts of green shoots at the state and local level. I see all kinds of politicians all over the country that actually want to unify and are not trying to get 100%. Here's this weird dynamic they have in politics in Washington, which is kind of political entertainment at this point. It's like a CEO saying, when I'm negotiating with one of my subs, if I don't get 100% of this negotiation, I've completely lost. That's wrong. You don't want to get 100%. You want people to walk away from the negotiating table actually happier than when they came. Everybody gets something. And that's the kind of politics that can actually win and in the long term help us make progress.